Good morning. My name is Rick Green. I'm editor and vice president of news for the Des Moines Register. With us today in our editorial board here in the Register newsroom is Ron Paul, representative from the 14th District of Texas. Congressman Paul, of course, is a candidate for the Republican Party nomination of the presidency of the United States for the 2012 election. Congressman, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in.
Appreciate it.
We wanted to give you a couple of moments, just a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about kind of where you are with the campaign, some of the key points that you're making out there to your supporters, and we'll start asking you some questions right after that.
Well, my campaigning has been going on for a long time. And I've been campaigning from the early 70s for liberty. I want limited government, I want rule of law, I want the Constitution. And I got involved in politics probably inadvertently because it was a place where I could express myself. So those issues that have been very important to me, I've been working on for a long time. And there's been a tremendous change in the country and the interest in what I've been doing since the 1970s. I was worried, even in the early 1970s, of a financial crisis, the type of which we're suffering from right now. So it's very appropriate that I continue, this effort, and especially in this campaign, because the whole country is looking for a new direction. But not only is it different from the 1970s, it's different from 1994 when there was a change in Congress, year 2000 there's a difference. But the big change in attitude, which reflects upon our campaign, has been the financial crisis, which has been recognized now by just about everybody from 2008, the collapse of the financial system, which we're in the middle of. And that is ongoing. It's very, very serious. And I think the people in Washington I know, whether it's the administration or Congress, are just floundering because they haven't addressed it properly from my viewpoint. And therefore, the views I express aren't exactly the most popular in Washington, but in the last 4 years, the interest has just exploded, which pleases me to no end. You take, for instance, the subject of monetary policy. We who have followed the Austrian School of Economics thought that was important as far back as 1912. Writing about this, Mises explained the business cycle and why you have booms and busts, but it's been totally ignored for another school of thought, and we have always been convinced that it would fail, and we believe that's what's happening right now. So that has been around, but now a lot of people are looking because the usual answers of, you have a little recession, you spend more money, you print more money, you borrow a little bit more money, Congress spends a little more money, and you can snap back to a degree, not realizing all you've done is patch the leak in the bubble and delay the inevitable. The inevitable is now here, and there's no patching up the bubble. The so-called success of those who believe differently than we do allowed the bubble to get bigger than ever. So we have a worldwide bubble bigger than the history of the world, but now we're facing it. So this has allowed the popularity of the views that I have been working on to be, much more acceptable because of the failure. So when I leave Washington, when I come to Iowa, when I go to the university campuses and talk to the young people, and lately, in the last couple of visits we've had on these town hall meetings have been slightly different because we've been getting, in the middle of the day, and rightfully so, and not on a campus, we've gotten a lot of people in the retirement age, sure. And they're very, very open to what I'm talking about. But it is sort of the conditions of the country, where we are on the business cycle, the need for change, and the openness of the people have now for different viewpoints with foreign policy, with our civil liberties, as well as our economic problems and the unemployment. So in that sense, I'm very, very encouraged, and of course it reflects in our campaign. It's easier to raise money, easier to get supporters, have a better organization than ever before. Our advertisements have been fantastic, and we're getting a lot of attention, and the volunteers are there. In our organization, what we have done is something that I don't watch day to day. My job is to keep doing what I've been doing, sure. And get people, give them a little incentive and a little explanation on what our goals are. And for that reason, I have become very optimistic in the political sense of what we're doing. I also know very much that if we continue to do what we do in Washington and we don't change our way, I'm very much of a pessimist. But long term, I believe that we'll turn this whole thing around and the country's going to be better off for it.
Good. We're going to talk to you briefly about the economy and your vision as it relates to creating jobs and getting the economic house back in order. But I just had a couple questions about foreign policy. You introduced a bill in '73 in 2001 to repeal the '73 War Powers Resolution. You sued President Clinton for some of his conduct during the Kosovo War. You voted against the Iraq War resolution. You support the withdrawal from the United Nations and NATO. Are you an isolationist?
No. It has nothing to do with isolation.
Talk a little bit about your foreign policy
I think
views.
the people who tend to be more isolationist than me are the people who criticize me for being isolationist, because they're the ones who tend to be more internationalistic and thinking that's the opposite of isolationism, that if you're involved in NATO and then you're involved in the UN and we need a presence in 150 countries and 900 bases, but they're the ones who are the most anxious to put on tariffs and restrict trade and do what isolationists do. They become mercantilists. They say, well, yes, they're the ones who promote trade barriers on Cuba. How long do we have to have trade barriers against Cuba? So they're the isolationists. I'm the free trader. Same way around the world. I want to make use of our 12,000 diplomats. Talk to people and try to work out problems and be more engaged in the world, and use military force and violence as last resort, and do it properly. Do it properly under the Constitution, and not allow a president to do it on his own or do it under authority from the United Nations or NATO, and Congress reneging on their responsibility. So I see myself as the freest trader in the Congress, and I'm an internationalist in the sense that it be all voluntary, that you have much more diplomacy with people, and this follows the Constitution. It follows the strong advice of our founding fathers. It said that we shouldn't be engaged in nation building and pushing ourselves around. Matter of fact, it really is George Bush's foreign policy of the year 2000 when he argued we should be more humble. We should not be arrogant. They will not like us if we're arrogant. We shouldn't be in nation building, as he was criticizing the Democrats. And too often both sides fib a little bit to the American people and say, yeah, I'm for less war and all this, and yet they end up doing more. But as far as being isolationist, I think an isolationist is somebody that wants to wall themselves off and put on terror. The isolationists wants, and you hear it in our own campaign on our side, we got to isolate China, blame China for everything, put on tariffs, and punish China. That's I don't want to do that. So I'm not the isolationist. They are the isolationists, and I think they're making a lot of mistakes.
You say you support wars with clear missions. Cite some examples of wars that we've been engaged in where the mission is clear.
World War II. Germany declared war against us, and the Japanese bombed us, and it's a good example of how it works. They didn't go to war the president didn't go to war without coming to Congress, and people knew about it. We knew who the enemy was. We made the declaration of war. Everybody got behind it. In 4 years, thereabouts, we've conquered. We won those wars. Today, because it's nebulous, we don't know who the enemy is, and we go to war not against governments, but we go to war against a group of people that are causing trouble, and it ends forever. Then we go into nation building, and we go to war with false information, some people call lies, when we go to war in Iraq. No Al-Qaeda there, no weapons of mass destruction. Between the two wars, if you add up the men lost in the contract labor, we've lost 8,500 people during these wars. We have not had any real victories. We've had 40,000 people come back wounded seriously, filling up our veterans hospitals. We have hundreds of thousands who are begging for help. There's an epidemic in many ways of suicide from people who have returned. I had a young veteran tell me the other day that he was just so upset because I do get the most support from military people, twice as much as everybody else put together. He was upset to see his buddies killed over there. Then he finally figures out, what am I doing over here? And then he comes home and he sees, I see some of my friends now committing suicide because their minds are all twisted up. So this to me makes no sense whatsoever, and that's completely different than declaring war when somebody attacks us, because we don't declare war. And the solution is a president should.
Have there been any other examples since World War II where you think the mission was clear?
No, absolutely not. It was fudged. It was wrong, and we're still suffering the consequences. These last 10 years, $4 trillion was added to our national debt for this. So yes, no, they were all unconstitutional. That's why I addressed the subject of the War Powers Resolution, because the War Powers Resolution was a reaction to Vietnam. And it was meant, the intention was to restrain the presidents from doing this. But so often what happens in Washington, when you see an opportunity, there's a problem, and you see the opportunity, what they do makes things worse. And that's what the War Powers Resolution did. It literally legalized war for 90 days. And once you're in war for 90 days, it's pretty hard to come back out of it. You should get the permission before you go in. So, but the presidents all dislike it because they think they're restrained too much. But a constitutionalist like myself, we object to it because we think they get too much license, and we believe that the Constitution is quite adequate on going to war.
Roosevelt had to do some fudging. Roosevelt had to do some fudging early in World War II before Congress.
Yeah, that type of maneuvering. I mean, once the attacks
Would you
occurred,
oppose that?
Would I what?
Would you have opposed what he did with
Absolutely, because he did us our maneuvering. But you know, once our policies, if they're not well informed and they cause trouble, but once you get bombed, you know, it's a lot of difficulty. I've mentioned that our foreign policy stimulates the hatred toward us and motivates Al Qaeda. But you know, once 9/11 occurs, you can't say, oh, well, you know, people in the past, you know, messed up, so we don't care about this. You know, no, you can't do that. But if you don't learn a lesson from it and change the policy, matter of fact, I think two great examples of learning a lesson has been both Ronald Reagan as well as Robert McNamara. When McNamara wrote his memoirs, you know, it was sort of a confession about the mistakes, and he wasn't feeling good. This was when he was getting pretty old. So he was asked by a reporter, he says, does that mean you want to apologize for it? Vietnam, because he was the motivator. He says, what good's an apology? He says, if you don't learn something from this and change your policy, it means nothing. Ronald Reagan did something very similar about when he sent the Marines in to Lebanon, and I remember that clearly because I was in the Congress and spoke out strongly against it. Why are we doing that? This leads to trouble. And Reagan at the time said, I'll never turn tail and leave. Tough. So he goes in there, and we occupy. It stimulates the incentive to use suicide terrorism, and the Israelis were there. The French were. I think the French were there. I'm not mistaken. The three of us, either French or the British, American. So suicide terrorism was going on. We lost 241 Marines, and the Marines came home. So Reagan did exactly what he said he wouldn't do. He wrote in his memoirs, he says, I said that. He says, I know I said that. He says, but I changed my mind because I didn't realize how irrational the politics was of that region. And he says, we should have been more neutral. If we had followed a position of neutrality, those Marines would be alive today. And those are powerful messages that we should pay attention to. These are people who, you know, push these policy. So I think we have to learn our lessons from this. So yes, some of the things that we did prior to World War II, history is showing that it wasn't exactly the best thing for us. You know, it motivated and gave an incentive for people to attack us. I don't know whether that's probably more true with Japan than it is with Germany. But once you're at war, you got to win them, and you get permission properly. You know, and then it's a lot harder. You know, there was no war. Maybe there was some, but you don't have war dissent during World War II like you had during Vietnam, and like today it's not so bad, but there's a lot of anti-war sentiment. Matter of fact, 65% or more of the American people want to get home from Afghanistan because we're broke and we're not winning the war, and there's no end in sight, and we're expanding these wars. So that is really a strong issue that's going on. It's an especially powerful issue when I talk to the young people. But when I talk to the elderly people, I said, look, I have a plan where I can take care of the elderly who have become dependent by cutting spending massively elsewhere. If we do nothing, you're going to get nothing because you're just going to get printed money and it's not going to be worth anything if we don't cut back. So I say, cut this money overseas, and they're with me on that. And the military is with me on that. The young people are with me on that. The majority of Americans now are with me on this. And yet policies never change. The policies are one party. One party, it's the same thing over and over again. No matter what they talk about, the presence around the world continues and expands. And it's done in a moralistic way. We have the moral imperative to spread our goodness around the world. We are the exceptional nation, and we have this obligation to do it. And I consider that a very serious mistake. I mean, if we want to be an exceptional nation, which I think we are or have been in the past, I think what we should do is set a good standard, have peace and prosperity, and offer that to everybody around the world. Just think of what we've achieved with peace in Vietnam and what failed for more than 10 years, killing, between us and the French, killing 1 million Vietnamese. And now we have peace, and they're westernized. We didn't have to fight the Soviets. We didn't have to fight the Chinese. We worked out a deal with Khrushchev at the height of the Cold War when they had missiles in Cuba, the month I was drafted, so I remember it well. So this idea we can't talk to people, and just think of the ridicule heaped on an individual like myself for saying, maybe we ought to talk to people before we start bombing them. And that's what we should do. And yet people say, no, you can't talk to them. Well, if you can talk, if we as a country can talk to the murdering communists of China and the Soviets who killed hundreds of millions of people and work out a deal, can't we talk to somebody who doesn't even have a nuclear weapon and try to work it out? Why should we be so anxious to resort to war and secret prisons and torture and assassination? It makes me rather sad to see this being accepted as being a good American and patriotic. I just have a strong disagreement with those sentiments.
You talk about the peace dividend that you get from bringing the troops home. That's not going to be enough to solve our financial problems in this country. What do we need to do beyond what the so-called super committees apparently deadlocked over to balance the budget?
Go back to 1991, and we would have had a tremendous one because the Cold War had ended. Instead, we expanded everything. No, right now, just bringing the troops home alone doesn't do it. But my plan does a lot more than that. I cut hundreds of billions of dollars from overseas expenditures. I change the foreign policy. I bring all the troops home, and through attrition, I make the military more streamlined. So yes, it takes a lot of cutting. I want to cut 5 departments. I want to cut $1 trillion. I want to cut the spending because I believe the debt burden is...
Well, those 5 departments, that doesn't get you $1 trillion. Where's the rest of it?
Well, we go on, almost everything goes back to the 2006 budget. So there are a lot of cuts. There's a lot of cut in overseas spending. We call it foreign expenditures. It's not foreign aid itself is just a small part of that. But it's a whole different attitude.
How much is that total?
In the military?
Foreign expenditures.
Foreign expenditures, $200 billion, and then the various.
That includes military spending.
Yeah, a lot of it's military, but not defense. I'd have a stronger defense. But no, there's a lot in the military. But that's where the dilemma is in Washington. Republicans are known. I mean, they would be hysterical if you cut a nickel. But the Democrats aren't willing to cut it either. They're not. Obama wants more money. His Secretary of Treasury wants more money for this stuff. Who did that? So I'm wanting to bring all these troops home. What is our president doing? He's putting troops in Australia because he's afraid China's going to attack us. So, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. We don't have any money. So if we want to take care of our people, if we want to preserve enough funding to take care of the children who are dependent and the elderly dependent on medical care and Social Security, which is a narrow group of people I want to protect because we have conditioned them to be so dependent. And everything else is up for grabs, for cutting. But, you know, a budget sometimes can be thousands of pages long. As ours isn't. It's more generalized, but it comes up with $1 trillion.
But if you preserve those programs that protect those group, the elderly, I mean, then you haven't cut $1 trillion out of the budget. I mean,
No, I do. We really do.
Retire.
We do cut enough, and it wasn't easy. Matter of fact, I wanted to balance the budget in 1 year, and I think your concerns or your point is that that's really tough. It was tough for me, you know, to literally do it. And we have some transition accounts, you know, for educational programs and some of these medical programs and there's some money, or something like if you get rid of the Department of Energy, what are you going to do with the control of nuclear power and things? We set aside funds for that. But no, we do come up with $1 trillion. A lot of it is with the reduction back to the '06 budget. You know,
what about projected deficits that come with
the only thing that counts for us is the first year. Is first year. We go out 3 years because by our projections and all, we would be to a balanced budget that would take care of the other 600. Now, we don't push this, but the truth is, if we gave reassurance and did everything right, business would boom. You know, we would get the reassurance, we'd have low taxes, less regulations, we'd bring capital back into this country, we wouldn't be putting money into bombs that go over and blow up something, and you don't have an increase in standard of living here. That money would all be spent back here. So, yes, it would be very encouraging because there'd be a lot of deregulations, and the businessman might decide to come back here and spend money here. But there's no incentive right now. Business people are not very anxious to start business here. They can do it easier in China than they can right here, because I had one businessman tell me that, you know, it took him 3 weeks in China. It would have taken him 3 years here to get the permits taken care of to open up a plant. So,
do we want to turn the United States into a China where you read about the quality of the air in some of the urban areas there, the pollution. I mean, part of the lack of regulatory involvement in China is that, you know, it's almost like we don't care what.
that's certainly true, but it's actually not getting worse. They're doing some, but it's still a big problem. No, you don't want to, but if you have a free market economy and you understand private property, it's not going to happen because nobody has a right to pollute. And we're much further advanced on property rights. So yes, they will not have the right to pollute, and they would have to, not pollute in the air. So I would say that we can do it, we can be competitive, but if we don't do it and we allow all our jobs to go overseas, it'll be devastating, and that is what's happened. Because if somebody's made some money overseas, bring it back in, we charge them 25-35% corporate tax and re-tax them again. Why come back? Their job is to be productive. I mean, that's what they're in business for. Make money. That's what markets are for. So but if we change the conditions, you don't have to give up on environmental controls. It would be done differently. I mean, I think it was the lack of understanding of property rights that allowed the pollution to occur during the Industrial Revolution. And once again, it was the partnership of big government and big business. I mean, they got together. I lived in Pittsburgh, and the sewers were put in the rivers, and the air was polluted by permission of the courts. Today, and Pittsburgh got cleaned up without the EPA. It's not like you need 10,000 bureaucrats from Washington to come down to Pittsburgh and tell them what to do. They decided this is filthy, and they cleaned up their act. So
Just getting back to an earlier point, if you support diplomacy and multilateralism, why do you oppose membership in the United Nations?
Because it's a loss of sovereignty. The first thing that the first thing the United Nations did was put us into a war that was undeclared. It went to the war under a UN resolution. Congress didn't vote for it. The people didn't care about it, and we went in and how many thousand? 38, 40,000 Americans were killed.
But the UN didn't declare that war.
Huh?
UN didn't declare that war.
Oh, it was on a UN resolution. It was a UN resolution. That's the authority. The UN gave us the authority to go there, and Truman accepted it. So it didn't come from the Congress. So I would say it's the loss of sovereignty. How did we go into Libya? I mean, the president just flaunted it. He didn't come to the Congress. He just says, I'm going, and NATO gave us the resolution. There was a UN resolution. It's under NATO. We're in Afghanistan under NATO. And so that's given up our national sovereignty. Besides, it costs us a lot of money. We have to pay more than the rest, and it's not a good investment. That money should be spent here at home. So those are the kind of things I wouldn't spend money on.
So is there any model of an international organization, peace organization, that you would support the U.S. belonging to?
No, the organization is just there to have somebody get control of it. Then they fight over control. You know, who's going to be controlling the organization? And so far, we have a lot of control because we have a lot of the money. But you know, orchestrating it doesn't give us more peace. It just means they become tools of our foreign policy. So the idea, if you don't have another government layer over and above our own government, doesn't mean that you don't want to use diplomacy and talk to people. Okay. I mean, it wasn't the UN that saved us from a nuclear clash in October 1962. It had to do with common sense between two leaders that didn't want to blow up the world. And fortunately, it worked out.
Dr. Paul, a few minutes ago you criticized using moral imperative as a rationale for going to war. Is there any reason whatsoever that you would, any condition under which you would use moral imperative for going to war, or would you go to war only if the United States were attacked?
No, I mean, the Constitution is very clear. And the moral responsibility is to defend the people of this country and to obey the law. That's the moral imperative. The moral imperative isn't say somebody needs us and you can draft somebody else's kids and take your money and go over there and say we are going to make that a better place. That was the motivation of the Jacobins. You know, they had this moral imperative. It was all well-intentioned, but that ended badly. World War I was a moral imperative of making the world safe for democracy. But the world isn't safer, and it isn't, you know, a greater democracy. Our moral imperative, they claim, for some of this Middle East stuff, is to give them a democratic government. At the same time, we're best of friends of the dictators of Saudi Arabia and the many other dictators we supported, even like we used to support the dictator Saddam Hussein. But the moral imperative, they need democracy, and we're going to force it upon them, and our children die, and we go broke on it. And guess what? In this country, what about the democracy in this country? I mean, if you ever came to the conclusion that the two parties are similar, which they are, you know, they both endorse the foreign policy, they both endorse the Federal Reserve, they both endorse the entitlement system, and neither side cares about the debt. So where does somebody go? Where do they go? Because you can't go into a third party. I mean, it's not available because the laws are written by the Republicans and the Democrats. In the major debates, who controls the debates when you have next November? It'll be a commission made up of the Republicans and the Democrats. So even if you had, it's not even like it used to be when the League of Women Voters did it. Now the parties control it. We don't have democracy here. What right do we have to assume that we can go over and have this moral imperative that we impose our goodness on them? And
so the equivalent of a Holocaust, you would do nothing?
Well, depends on what the status is. We did do something. We were involved in World War II. The people who committed the Holocaust declared war against us, so I don't see the issue.
But if Germany were not at war then?
No, we can, no, our government doesn't have it. But if there was a compulsion, there was a public sentiment for it, believing that it was a threat to our national security, I wouldn't be the decision maker. That's the U.S. Congress. But no, I don't think that that is necessary. I think if people care, they should have the right to go over there and pick up a rifle, go send their money, do whatever they want. But I don't have the moral authority to compel you to go over and settle a dispute. Think of many other episodes. How many times has that happened in Africa? I mean, they're killing millions of people in these wars in the poor countries of Africa. Nobody even pays any attention to those. There has to be a moral imperative there. If you follow that through, you have to get involved in every single thing. Which ones are you going to pick and choose? So it is endless. And that's more or less where we are, except it's so inconsistent, it's so hypocritical, because at the same time, we prop up the dictators. I mean, we propped up the Shah of Iran. They got a little upset with us there. We prop up all the kings that practice Sharia law in Saudi Arabia. 15 out of 19 come here and try to kill us all. And then we pretend that we're going to get rid of a dictator that hated the Iranians and hated the Al-Qaeda. And we throw him out, he gets rid of all the, and then when we take over Iraq, we get rid of all the Christians, and the Al-Qaeda comes in. The whole thing is totally foolish. It makes no sense whatsoever. And the reason, I don't believe I will persuade the majority of the American people from the moral argument. But I tell you what, the majority of the American people are with me right now, because half of them understand exactly what I'm saying. The other half know we're broke and we can't afford it. And the other group that know exactly what I'm doing are the military people, and they don't want it. They want to come home. They see no future in this, and that is why they give me the support overwhelmingly.
So are you ruling out a third-party run yourself?
Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not planning to do anything like that.
Why?
I don't want to. I just don't want to.
Well, why shouldn't there be a third-party alternative?
Because of what I just described. Because it's a losing adventure. You probably wouldn't have me in here. Would you have me in here if I was running on a third party right now? You wouldn't be talking to me.
Well, a lot of Republicans say you don't uphold a lot of Republican viewpoints. I mean, are you really representing
I think it's the
Republicans?
funniest thing in the world. Take a look at the Republican platform. They talk about personal liberty, balanced budget, limited government, strong national defense, free markets. I'm the best in all of those. I'm the one that wants to balance the budget. I vote against all the spending. I care about personal liberty, all the things they talk about. And then they say I'm not a Republican? I mean, anybody buys into that, they're not listening, because I'm closer to the Republican platform than any of the others.
So they're Republicans in name only? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they don't follow the platform or what Republicans profess to believe in, as I do, and they should be called on it.
You're going to be participating in the Family Leaders debate later today, which is basically a test of Christian social conservative principles. Where would you say you fall in the spectrum of candidates on that issue, on social conservatism?
I'm very conservative on social issues. I strongly believe that life is precious and it's a gift from our Creator, and that if you don't believe and protect life, you can't protect liberty, and I'm a champion of protecting liberty. If you don't understand the essence of life, you cannot protect liberty.
So women shouldn't have the right to choose?
Pardon me?
Women should not have the right to choose abortion?
Well, I think somebody has to speak for the fetus. Doesn't the fetus have a right to choose too? I've seen babies, 8th and 9th month of pregnancy as pretty much a human being. Who speaks for them? Somebody has to speak. Who speaks for a 1-minute-old baby? Does a 1-minute-old baby have a right? Somebody speaks for him? What if there's no mother? What if the baby is just left there? Do you throw it in the garbage and kill it? No, you don't. Somebody speaks for a 1-minute-old baby. Who speaks for a baby and a fetus 1 month or 2 months before birth? So why does the fetus get excluded? Is this not a human being, or is it not alive? What is it? What is it? Who speaks for it?
Well, we have no moral imperative for a Holocaust, but we have a moral imperative for a fetus. Is that what you're saying?
I don't see the connection at all. I think life is life. We're not going over to China to say that you shouldn't abort female fetuses, I mean, that would be the description of a moral imperative. If you say, does the state of Iowa have the right to protect a fetus a minute before birth because the fetus deserves protection and has a freedom of choice to live or not? Does under our Constitution permit Iowa to have a law that prevents that? To argue the other side is, oh, it's not a violence, it's not a life, it's not human, and it's not an act of violence to destroy the unborn. And the federal government has no authority whatsoever to tell Iowa to decide what they should do with what they construe as violent acts. That would be like saying, well, you're allowed to prosecute people for first-degree murder, but not for manslaughter and that sort of thing. These are difficult subjects. The founders were geniuses at this, not having one monolithic solution for the whole country because different states would do it different ways. So, yes, there's a very strong argument. I am very much aware of it because if that unborn and the mother comes to my office and I give the wrong drug, and what if I damage or hurt or kill the fetus? I'm in big trouble. If you're in a car accident and the mother doesn't get hurt but the fetus dies and she aborts, you're in big trouble because you've committed an act of violence. If you want to deal with the legality of when does a fetus get legal rights, it really is at conception. So what if there's a conception and the father dies? Inheritance rights are determined by the date of conception, and it would be determined by the father. The father would be involved. So there's every precedent in the world that there is a legal being there that has qualified for protection, but you can't just say, well, it's okay, it's legal here now, but if under other conditions, if the mother, makes her argument and say, well, you can't tell me what to do, it becomes difficult. But believe me, I've been in OB business for a long time. I know all the pros and cons and the difficult situations, and that's why I don't want one answer for all. I want federal laws. I don't want amendments to the Constitution, and I just don't think it's the prerogative of the federal government to be involved.
So as president, would you select Supreme Court justices who are opposed to abortion?
I would select the Supreme Court of Justices on their understanding of the Constitution. Because if they describe what I just described, their personal position would not be quite as important. But I want to know what they think about the First Amendment. I want to know how they reflect on all the Bill of Rights, on property rights, on the General Welfare Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause. I want them to know about this. I want to know what they think about the Necessary and Proper Clause. And then their whole issue on abortion would be less important because their proper position would have been on Roe versus Wade, that they wouldn't hear the case and the states could make their own decisions.
You, in describing yourself as a constitutionalist, you say that no law should be passed unless you can cite specifically in the Constitution where it's authorized. You've read the document, it doesn't specify very much. So am I right to assume that you would agree that most, or you would say most laws on the books don't have a constitutional basis?
That's true. And all the regulations and all the legislation done by executive orders. And that's why we're in this mess, because we do not have the rule of law. That is why we have a government now that is known that we have endorsed torture. We've rejected defense of habeas corpus. We have endorsed assassination by our presidents. One person deciding which Americans can be assassinated, and nobody's saying anything.
With drones, you mean?
Well, however, drones. And even when they kill a 16-year-old boy, happens to be the son of a guy that wasn't very nice, but he was never convicted of anything, never tried, no charges made, and the American people aren't saying anything. We should be outraged over this. I mean, it is. If we accept this without saying anything, we're in big trouble. And that is why the rule of law is so important. I am, that to me is very, very discouraging. But I can go out and I talk like this to the college kids, and I talked yesterday to older groups, and I talked to them about bringing our troops home. The reception is very good.
But
If
on
you
that-
were,
go ahead.
I was going to say, if you were in the White House during the past 3 years or so, would you have had a different strategy as it related to Saddam Hussein as the president had?
No, because I voted for that. I would have been different 10 years ago. I voted for the authority because we voted for the authority of going after those individuals responsible for 9/11. We had him more or less trapped at Tora Bora. Matter of fact, I was in that region when I was in the Air Force. I have a little image in my mind about that region, but they had him essentially trapped. And they just sort of forgot about him, and oh, we got to go after Iraq, and Iraq had nothing to do with it. That is just horrible. So yes, I voted for the authority. I lament the fact that it took 10 years, but I also introduced something to try to prevent them from going into this endless war, and that was I restored the idea of the letter of marque and reprisal. The effort where you can literally hire people to go out, just as they did, Jefferson and others did that when they went after the pirates, because it wasn't the government that was attacking us on the high seas, they were pirates. So we would hire people and they would have, and this was legally recognized internationally, excuse me, and even though you would have this authority, the authority was very limited to go after certain people, but it wasn't authority to just go and be lawless. So I wanted them to do that, and just remember how Ross Perot dealt with his hostages in Iran. Everybody remember that? He hired some ex-military special forces, and he went over there and he pulled it off. He got his people out, and of course when we attempted to do it, it ended up in a disaster. So I thought, letter of marque and reprisal, somebody like Ross Perot, just think of what $500 million or $1 billion would have meant in saving the lives of how many Americans and how many that are casualties now, and how many innocent Iraqis. They say close to 1 million Iraqis, have died. So there are alternatives, and that's when you live within the confines, of the Constitution, always trying to hold back on the military rather than saying, oh, we are powerful, we're going to do it. Weapons themselves will not bring peace if you don't know how to use them. Weapons can be used for defending our country and keeping people from threatening us, but that in itself, can't solve all those problems. That's why I think the letter of marque and reprisal was a great idea. So I endorsed that idea. That I think it could have been. If we arrested and captured and gave trials to people, to me it seems like it could have been a little bit fascinating to see what it would have been like to find out what bin Laden would tell us or something. But we give trials to people like Adolf Eichmann. Israel gave them a trial. We gave trials to all the Nazi war criminals. And can you think of the height of anger at the war criminals that participated in the Holocaust? We gave them trials.
But if we'd had the opportunity to take them out during the war, we would have done it.
Probably. If it was declared war, it certainly is different than when you don't have a
Well, you
declared
said
war.
you supported the authorization. You're talking about after 9/11.
Yeah, that was a reaction. It was a
That
limited
not-
authority.
Does not give authority for the drone strikes that you're objecting
Now?
to now.
No, they're not bombing anybody that they're not being charged with participating in 9/11.
But we've declared war on terrorists.
Who
generally.
did?
The United States in,
Who?
in
When?
the declaration.
I'd like to see the
that you signed.
document. And terrorism is nothing like criminality. Terrorism is a tactic. And they want you to think you're at a war atmosphere, then they can violate your civil liberties. They can pass Patriot Acts and do anything they want because the conditions are right. When war's going on, they can undermine your liberties here at home. So, no, I think it's very dangerous. That's just a concocted term to generate, enough fear to get the people and the Congress to capitulate. And if you don't agree with it, then you're un-American. You're unconstitutional. You don't care. You're weak on national defense because you want to defend the Constitution. So I think it's wrong.
How do you reconcile the sort of the interest in gay marriage with the whole liberty, pursuit of happiness? What's the role of government in there? Not at all?
I mean, that's my ideal, is just about out. I think it's a very important thing. I happen to be married for 54 years, so I think a lot of the importance of marriage, and I think a lot of the dictionary too, and I know what the dictionary says marriage should be and is. But I don't want to, I didn't vote for the marriage amendment. I mean, to me it's defining a word. You know, if you want to define it one way and me another way, it sounds like a First Amendment issue. and why should I try to convince you of my definition? Or why do I want somebody else to impose their ideas on me and make me accept their definition? So I want the government out. If you're going to have government under the Constitution, the states can, you know, they have a lot more authority than the federal government has, you know, to define it. But I'd rather see it be outside of government, and then we would not be arguing about this. I mean,
But there are certain, the state of marriage under tax laws, etc., conveys certain privileges that don't go to those who are unmarried.
I'd probably change the tax code then and get rid of all the taxes. That would be a solution for that.
So you get government out of the business of authorizing
marriage?
Or, yes.
I would. I mean, I personally would. I would. You know, traditionally, if you go back in history and you want to find out tradition of, you went to Bibles, you know, went to the Bible and they'd follow it back, and people would be married in their churches. But to me, it seems like such a wonderful solution that you can have your definition, I'll have my definition. I won't tell you what to believe. You don't tell me what to be. You don't force your views on me. I don't force my views on you. I think it's wonderful.
Isn't that in effect what the Iowa Supreme Court did in Iowa?
Well, I'm not familiar enough to know exactly what they did, but
They said
I think
they said if the state's going to grant the rights under this definition of marriage,
I think
to this group, they have to
the states
grant
have.
all.
The states wouldn't necessarily agree with what I'm giving my personal opinion what I think should be done, but under the Constitution, the federal government should not have say on it. But the states would still have authority to do what they wanted.
Is there any federal role in sort of kind of bringing a sense of equality across the country, so that, you know, the person who lives in Texas isn't left with fewer rights and liberties than the person who lives in Iowa? Because, I mean, there are some states in the South probably where there would be a sense of, you know, we really don't think that blacks are the same as whites.
No, that problem's been taken care of.
But it was the courts that, it was the government that did it.
Yeah, the government was at fault. The government was at fault, you know, with the slave issue as well as this discrimination. So the government was at fault, and national laws, the 14th Amendment did apply. You can't take a group of people and deny them certain rights. I think where the biggest discrimination occurs now is in the judicial system. Have you ever looked at the people who end up getting the death penalty? It doesn't seem to be fair and balanced. And look at the number of people who have been in prison for drug usage. You know, 12% or so are blacks, and 30-some% are arrested, 50% are in prison. The people who don't get the death penalty and don't get arrested are people who are wealthy and tend to be white. So that is still where there's a lot of discrimination, where the federal government would have some just, you know, they could have an influence on that, because you're not allowed to discriminate in that sense. So you can't have discriminatory laws and treat black people a certain way than you should, and under the 14th Amendment.
You define yourself as a free market person, believer. Why shouldn't that apply to immigration as well?
I think there's a pretty good argument for that. That's the ideal, and a lot of free market people would argue that.
Would you?
And in a way, that's what the founders argued. And that's why they gave us the Interstate Commerce Clause. But now the Interstate Commerce Clause has been grossly distorted. It's used now to regulate rather than deregulate. They wanted a free market zone. Now, I would argue in the sense, but conditions today are really, really tough for economic reasons because, we have people that come over our borders, and I'd be in a hospital, I'd deliver a newborn baby, the baby becomes an automatic citizenship, and the next day the hospital needs money, so they sign them up for welfare programs, and then they get charged a lot of money, and the process continues. The welfare state interferes with it. If you had a true free market, healthy economy, I believe that we should have a much more generous approach to immigration and our workforce. I would not say that just walking in and out under today's circumstances would be a good idea.
Well, but I mean, if the market calls for X number of workers from Mexico or Latin America, then why not?
That's what we should really work for, because I still, even with the problems we have today, I still have people coming to my office looking for workers. There are jobs out there, but you have to be trained. But our system of education, since it's been taken over by the federal government, they're coming out of college, all they have to show for is debt and a poor education. They can't take these technological jobs that they need. So they say, get me somebody from Japan or India to fulfill these jobs. These jobs are going running. So we've messed up our economy so badly that just bringing more people in that will bring their families over and go on to welfare rolls, that compounds our problems. That's part of the problem that hit California, and it's hitting Texas. Literally because there's no control at all. Our hospitals have had to close, our school districts are going bankrupt, and it's a real big economic problem. But a free and prosperous economy would be very, very generous for immigration. We've never, even though we were very generous in our early history, we never had just free immigration. Everybody, came in and they went through at least some ritual back then that was a lot on health reasons and also.
What do you think of any case where a decision to regulate beyond, can you think of any case where a decision to regulate beyond the constitutional restrictions might be the result of national consensus, something that happens through the democratic process? People choose not to contest it because they think it's so important that we have a national standard for some things. I mean, would you make allowances for that?
Yeah, if you did it properly, and sort of like on education, let's say that the consensus of the country is that we love the federal government controlling our education. Iowa doesn't know how to do it, so we need a consensus to instruct you what to do. You should change the Constitution. So if you want national laws, you have to change the Constitution. If you do it without changing the Constitution, you diminish the importance of the rule of law. And that's why if you go to war without a declaration and you write these regulations and make them national, guess who wants national regulations the most? It's the corporate industries. They're the ones who do it. The consumers never ask for it. Never is too strong. But most of the time, matter of fact, the left into Congress mock the Republicans because they're opposed to some of the state rights issue, because the Republicans tend to support nationalizing regulations. They want more regulations because big businesses want this, and they don't want a more stringent regulation by the states. So if you want the federal government to do it, you should modify the Constitution. Otherwise, you just throw the Constitution out, and there's not much left to it. If you keep throwing more bits and pieces out, this thing is going to be so out of control. I mean, the privacy is gone. The Patriot Act controls. The TSA just mauls us, and we don't care. And it's just going to go on and on. So, no, you have to be cautious. If you want federal regulations, you have to change the Constitution.
How would you balance the desire for free trade against American business?
The what?
How would you balance the desire for free trade against American business interests, especially in the beginning?
Free trade is good for the American businesses. I don't think this cliche or myth is that if you don't have free trade, if you have free trade, it hurts us, and therefore we have to manipulate interest rates. No, if you don't have free trade, you go to protectionism. You manipulate interest rates. That's why fluctuating fiat currencies worldwide is a detriment, because everybody's competing low, and we lower ours, China lowers ours, we scream at them. That leads to trade wars, and then there's the protectionism, and they raise tariffs. You go to the WTO, and if you think, right now, that's the argument. China's unfair, so I think one candidate wants to go to the WTO and get sanctions put on for the benefit of the business people. It's all a myth. That it might help for a couple weeks or months or so, but then the prices adjust and prices go up. No, business people, let's say that you have true free markets, but still somebody can produce something cheaper than us. Well, that's good. That's good. We're getting a better deal. And we have to take those resources and go into something else or improve our productivity and our efficiency so that we compete. We did that in our early history. I mean, we were the great producers. I mean, we could produce the steel and the cars and everything else, but now we can't compete because we've undermined this whole concept of the market economy.
What is the government's responsibility with regard to providing income supports to people in poverty?
The government's responsibility.
We're talking about public welfare programs.
Yeah, their responsibility to the poor is to provide the maximum of prosperity and the maximum jobs for people so that there's very, very few poor. But if you are indicating that maybe this would invite the force of government to come and extract funds from one group and give it to another group, that's very bad because it ends up like the housing program did. That was the principle that was based on the housing program. Print money and then have affirmative action programs, force banks to give bad loans, risky loans, and everybody gets a house. So it gets out of control. The big industries, the mortgage companies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, rip us off. The banks make billions. They get into derivatives, and then the housing bubble bursts. So who got the bailout? They got the bailout. What happened to the people you wanted to help? They lost their jobs and they lost their houses. It doesn't work.
But regardless of how we got there, there are an estimated 15% of Americans who are living in poverty right now. Should they not be entitled to welfare benefits?
Well, under my program, I have a transition program. You know, all my cuts are cuts from the big industries, the corporate welfare, the overseas spending, and what I do is the only way you can protect these people who have become dependent is doing what I'm talking about. That doesn't mean that I endorse this forever, but if we continue to do this, everybody is going to suffer because there will be less wealth, more poverty. So I preserve in my program taking care of those who are indigent, they need medical care, the elderly, and the medical care and the Social Security, and this program can do it. But it won't happen if the people don't endorse a changed foreign policy. If you still think we have to be the policeman in the world and say, oh, let the president send 15,000 troops to Australia and never ask any question and stir up a fight with China, no, you can't do it. The poor people will become more numerous. And this is the whole thing. Cutting from overseas, you can help save and work, but we have to change the program. You have to change the monetary system, the tax code, the regulatory code to get production back. We're not producing, and you can't borrow forever. We have been led to believe that we can get away with this by just printing more money because the world has accepted our money because it's the reserve currency in the world, but less so every day. And now it's destined to have another downgrading on our credit rating. And that means that it's not in the too distant future, interest rates are going to go up. And prices are going up. Guess who gets hurt? Not the poor people. Because they always still have to go and buy stuff. They have to buy clothes and they have to buy gasoline. And they're the ones who suffer from this the most. So if anybody cares and has a humanitarian instinct, they have to really study the market. Because if you think it's government and you're wrong, you're going to make things worse. And that's why I think it's so crucial to understand how the market works, how valuable freedom is, and how important monetary policy is.
Tell me real quickly, what are your thoughts about the super committee, its work, what's going to happen next week, and what are the ramifications?
I'm against the super committee. It's not going to work, nor will the Congress work, because they're deadlocked, because they won't admit the problem is serious. They won't admit that we're bankrupt. They won't admit either side that we have to cut something. So if it goes into sequestration and there's a nickel and a dime taken away from the military projected increases, no real cuts. There's no, even if they fail and there's the automatic cuts, there's no cuts no actual cuts. It's all cut in the proposed increases. And there's several in Washington, a coalition of Democrats and Republicans that will introduce a resolution and will exempt all those military expenditures and make sure that nothing get cuts. They are more sacred than child health care. My argument is, no, the child health care should be more sacred than the military spending that just gets us into trouble. So I don't think it should have been established, and I don't think it's going to work because they're not admitting the truth.
Great.
What cuts would you make in Medicare and Social Security?
At the present, nothing, other than
In
the fact.
future? I'm talking about the future, when
I'd,
all
uh,
projections are it's
Well,
gonna-
I think
it's gonna
eventually,
go up.
let's say we did get the people to endorse what I want to do. I'd let young people get out, and we can still do it. But then eventually, if the number's up against the wall, it depends on how productive we are. Productivity is unpredictable. Unemployment rates are unpredictable. Interest rates are unpredictable. But if it all went favorable, it might not be till 5 or 10 years you'd have to do something. Then you might have to change the ages and the benefits. But the problem now is the benefits are going down automatically because the value of the dollar is going down automatically. That's what has to be stopped. So yes, there should be some proposals. I don't detail that, but in the future you probably would have to do it. But it depends on how well the economy recovers.
Great. Okay, we've got run out of time. You've got about 6 weeks, sir, before caucus night. Wondering if you have any final comments here about why the Iowa caucus goers should support you that night and why you were in the Register's endorsement.
If they care about freedom and prosperity and peace, they'll be there, and there's a large number have already indicated they will be there. And we had a function this morning, and I got a little charge out of it, and the MC was saying, well, he says, one thing we know, he has a lot of supporters, and he was not an announced supporter of mine, which made it even more interesting. He says, one thing we know, that if on January 3rd it's 10 below zero and 10 inches of snow, Ron Paul supporters will be there. So that made me feel good.
Dr. Paul, thanks for being here
Thank
with
you.
us.
Enjoyed it.
Appreciate it.